All right, we're going to be starting in just a moment. Hang in there, folks. Give or take. Hello, hello. You are at Tips, Tools, and Techniques Club at the Sewing Studio in Maitland, Florida. Welcome. My name is Mary-Jeanine Ibargüen, and I am really happy to be here today with you. I've got some very cool projects, including this quilt behind me. So stick around. Please let us know where you are from. I already see Texas and Sun City Center. We have one of our employees works in Sun City Center. He drives a long way. Seattle, Washington, Lakeland, Florida. And yeah, so far so good. Please let us know where you're from. We love to know who's hooking in. So if you are watching live, ask questions. Feel free to ask anything, even if it doesn't have to do with the project. I've been quilting for over 35 years, and I've been teaching for over 25 years. So I've got a lot of knowledge that I love to share, and I love to turn people on to fun new projects and fun new ideas. Tips, tools, and techniques. It's the name of it says it all. So I want to tell you about a couple classes I have coming up that still have room. If I don't mention the class, it's probably because the class is full. The first one, we're going to put up a picture of the San Julian quilt, and it is a beginner class. So if you've never made a quilt, or maybe you've been making a few quilts, but you feel like there's a lot of stuff out there that I should know to make the job easier or more efficient. So the quilt that you're looking at there is the San Julian. It's a very simple design. You'll notice that there's some big flowers, and then there's slightly smaller flowers with like black and white fabric around it. So it's basically 2 blocks in a checkerboard pattern. So you're going to learn how to choose fabrics. You're going to learn how to rotary cut, piece that quilt. So the quilt, it's 2 mornings, but and you won't learn how to quilt it or bind it. Those are separate classes, but you will make a quilt top. And we can talk about quilting it and binding it later. My quilting basics, which happens to be full this quarter, so we'll do it again next quarter. We always have that quilt class going. That will you'll learn how to quilt and bind in that class. So yeah, so that's a great beginner class, just to maybe fill in some of those holes. If you've been quilting for a while but never taken a class, you may be amazed at how many great new ideas and notions are out there for you. Okay, the next quilt, we'll take that one down, but next quilt is my machine applique basics. And basically you're going to learn how to applique on the top of a quilt without using an embroidery machine. I'm kind of still old school. I've done a little bit of machine applique with my embroidery machine, but I also like to do it with just cutting out designs, fusing it down, and then sewing it around the edges. So we're going to do that in the machine applique basics. It's in November 5 and 19. I think I'm going camping in the middle of the week, and that's why it's skipping a week. T-shirt quilt. We'll show you a picture of my t-shirt quilt. So most times when you see t-shirt quilts, they are pieced into the quilt. Where I came up with this idea, somebody had like an old coverlet, and they wanted to put some t-shirts on it, which gave me the idea. So instead of piecing it in, to applique them to the front. So we use some fusible tape around the edges. So it's very simple. The only sewing really involved is creating that background piece. And if you really wanted to, you could just have a solid piece of fabric and we could applique the t-shirts to that. I think the best thing about this idea is that you'll notice that all the t-shirt faces are different sizes. So for my daughter, I made her a quilt where, you know, she started out this tiny little thing and the shirts were small. And as she grew, the shirts got bigger. And I was able to use all the shirts without having to, you know, make them all the same size face. So that is a friend of mine, Mo, took the class. She put 37 t-shirt faces on the front of one quilt. So, and then she put more on the back. Her daughter runs a lot of races. So lots of great options there for a t-shirt quilt. Also, people came in and just made a small wall hanging with maybe 6 t-shirt fronts. So show you how to do all that. Another class, oh, and so that one is December 10th and 17th. Didn't write down the day, but you can look it up in your calendar. I have a tote bag. I'm just going to reach over here. Made this particular one with Soft and Stable, so it stands up on its own. Basically, it's called MJ's Simple to Sew Tote. And basically, you're going to learn how to put in a lining, how to put in a pocket, how to put on handles, how to box the corners, and you will leave the class with a finished tote. 3-hour class, just one morning. I like to offer this class at the beginning of, or right before Christmas, so you can make gifts if you want. There's a little handmade little piece of hardware there. That's fun. We've got some different styles for that to put on the tote before you give it away. So that's MJ's Easy to Sew Tote, and I've got a few openings in that. Finally, my machine quilting. I always teach it at least once a quarter, sometimes twice. And then my binding class usually once a quarter. So if you need to learn some really good tips on putting the binding on, I'm your teacher then. I also wanted to announce that we have a shop hop happening soon, November 22nd to December 7th. And we have 7 stores, and they're all around this area. So we've got Lady Lake, Mount Dora, Maitland, Crystal River. It's pretty far over, and then Brooksville on the way back, and then another Lady Lake. So if you hit all the shops and get your passport stamped at all the shops, you could be put in for prizes. $75 prize at the store that you were last at for first place, and then a $50 prize for second place. But also you get fabric and a pattern kit at every shop. You wouldn't happen to have a picture of the finished quilt? Don't remember. It's hanging at the front. You'll just have to come visit us. But it is really pretty. I walked in this morning. Wow. Yes. So the idea behind a shop hop is to visit all the local shops, but also to collect whatever they're giving out, whether it's a jelly roll strip or a pattern or both. In this case, it's a kit and the pattern. So for $7, that's a pretty good deal. $7 once, and you get 7 different kits. So that's a pretty good deal. Passports are $7 prior to the shop hop, $8 during the shop hop. Did I say the dates? November 22nd to December 7th. Shop hop. If you have any questions about how shop hops work, let me know. Hello, Tallahassee and Eagle Lake, Florida. I'm not sure if I know where Eagle Lake, Florida is. Hi, Georgia. Were you in my class last night? You were. It's good to see you here. And Georgia and Ohio and DeBerry and Arizona. My sister lives in Gilbert, Arizona, right next door to Chandler. So say hi to my sister for me. Dundee, Florida. All right. Thank you so much for letting us know. Please continue to let us know where you're coming from. I think that is awesome. I don't think we will ever stop doing TT&T online because I get to reach so many people. We have a great online presence. Kelsey's going to put up our discount if you put in TTT at the end of your order. You get 15% off all day today and all day tomorrow, and that is this 15% discount code for that. We have a huge website. Pretty much everything in the store, few exceptions, most everything on the store is online. Also, my favorites, some of the things I'm going to talk about today are on my favorites page, so we'll put the link of that up. So if you don't have a zipper by the yard or whatever, you can order that with 15% off. And then I'm talking faster than Kelsey can cut and paste. And then the third thing that we're going to put up is my free handouts, a link to the free handouts. If you haven't snagged them yet, please do. And what I like to do at home is I'll just bring it up on a second device. But if you want to print it out, you certainly can do that too. And I'm going to be talking about the quilt behind me in just a moment. That's the first thing on the handout. So you are going to want to bring that up on, like I said, on a device or print it out before we get started. Hello, Melbourne. And I'm guessing that is from Florida and not Australia. Claremont, Crystal River. Well, thank you for tuning in. All right. I think we're going to get started here on the first quilt, which is behind me. And the handout, in my handout, I call it Plaid Boxers. It is boxes, and possibly some of my fabric might have come from boxer shorts. If you've listened to me at any length of time, you know that I like to collect plaid shirting, plaid shirts from thrift stores. So I started with reds, whites, and blues because I love red, white, and blue quilts. And then pretty soon I realized if I just got some green shirts, then I could do Christmas quilts with my reds and whites. And then recently I was at a museum and I saw a baby quilt made out of plaid shirtings. I'm sorry, pastel plaid shirtings, and I fell in love. So now I'm collecting plaid pastels, which are gorgeous together. So yeah, so anyway, this is made out of that collection. What's interesting about this quilt is that these little boxes are not pieced into the larger square. They're literally appliqued down, raw edge appliqued. So we're going to talk about that. So all of these. So if you think about the possibilities here, anything is possible. You could applique down circles, triangles. I have seen a quilt made a double wedding ring, which is kind of a difficult quilt to piece. I have one on my bed right now, but it took a long time. I've seen it with a solid background and then those pieces raw edge down. So no piecing. It's all raw edge applique down. So we'll talk about how to do that, but just the opportunities and the options are endless. So this is just one idea. Yes, I did wash and dry it. So if you were to, I don't know if Kelsey can get up close and personal on this quilt and you can see some of these raw edges, but we're going to pull it up here in a second here. There we go. Keep on going. So raw edges, and I straight stitched down. Yeah, straight stitch down these squares, some very close to the edge and some not so close to the edge, and that's okay. I think it adds to the charm of the primitive quality of this. And you know, yours wouldn't have to be nearly so primitive either. You could, you know, I think the plaids kind of add to the primitive quality a little bit, but yours, you know, you don't have to do that. It could be a little more, what's a little more modern maybe is what I'm looking at. This, and you know, if you didn't know these were pieced in, I kind of think it has a modern look also. So let's talk about it. So the first thing I did is I took, I want to say 7.5 inch, I have a 7.5 inch ruler. So I cut a bunch of 7.5 inch squares and I sewed them all together. In a minute, I'm going to do a demo on how to sew them together in a very efficient way. But let's continue on this. So I made the background. Let's call that these 7-inch squares, the background. I sewed them all together. Then I basted and quilted the batting and the backing, right? I still don't have these little squares. All I've got is the 7-inch squares plus a batting and a backing. I basted it the way I normally baste a quilt. And then I quilted, if we were to get up close and personal again, Kelsey, we're going to be able to see maybe some of these leaves. Yeah, so I used like a forward, I can show it on paper how this, I love this design because you're always going forward. You make a leaf and you go forward, you make a leaf and you go forward, and I can show you on paper in a minute, but super simple. So I probably, you know, went across all the lines horizontally and then I came down vertically. The reason I quilted the seams is, if you've ever heard me talk, you've probably heard me say that I think it's very important to quilt down seams more than anything else, because when you go to wash and dry this quilt, what's going to get worn out the fastest is these intersections and the seams. So if we nail those down, I think it's safer than not. Quick story, when I first started making quilts 30 whatever years ago, and all my friends were having babies, and I would make something similar. Maybe you put a little bear in the center or something, and I did a little quilting in the center of each block. And then a year later, they literally bring me this pile of rags, strings, whatever. Can you put this back together? And I realized that all the seam allowances had come apart because I didn't nail them down, and they were getting worn in the laundry. So I soon learned, don't worry about the center of the blocks. Be thinking about what's going on in the intersections. Okay. So again, take our 7-inch, basted it, quilted it. Now I'm ready to put these little boxes on. And I, again, cut squares. There's a few rectangles here, mostly squares, all different sizes, all different. And there's a bit of a pattern here. I have the greens and then the lights and then the reds and then the lights and then the greens. So little pattern going on there. And then I just chose like a contrasting square or rectangle, and I glue sticked it down. That's glue sticked it down. So everything is glued down. And then I went through with sewing through all the layers. So 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of batting and fabric. Test it again. I'm testing again. Still nothing? You can hear me. Can you hear me now? Let me know if you can hear me now. We have lost the sound. So let me know if you can hear me now. Still checking. Okay, back on. Yay, okay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. Something changed there. We're not sure what it was. Battery died. All right. Okay, I'm trying to remember where I was. Let me know if I skipped a step here. We sewed through the 3 layers. We're cutting out squares. We're glue sticking them down. Hopefully you caught that part. So a little glue stick. And I actually have glue stick on my favorites page. If you don't have a glue stick, I'd love for you to buy it from us. Just a little dab of glue stick. You don't need to put glue over the whole thing. Just a couple dabs. And then I'm ready to take it to my machine. Again, you could use a walking foot, but stitching in the ditch to sew down the seams. Yes, you could stitch in the ditch. I used a little leaf pattern that I'll talk about in a minute, but stitching in ditch is fine. You know, to be honest, rather than stitching in the ditch, which I find can be difficult, I like to stitch on the ditch. So a simple serpentine stitch coming down here, and most of you have serpentine stitch on your machine, that would be just fine. Don't do a decorative stitch that's super complicated, because A, it'll put down a lot of thread, B, it takes a long time, and C, it makes your quilt hard where that decorative stitch is. But I find serpentine, a lot of quilters really love that serpentine stitch because it covers a lot of ground and it covers a lot of sins. So let me know, and Kelsey, if you could put these questions up on the corner, that'd be great. Okay, so we're back to the squares. So yes, you could use a walking foot, but you would have to move that quilt, every time you got to a corner, you have to move the quilt, and that's a lot of work. So instead, what I do is I use a ruler foot and a straight edge quilting ruler, not a cutting ruler, but a quilting ruler, and that makes it easy to do these straight lines. If you are doing circles, then you would need to get a circle ruler that would fit to go on the inside of that. So hopefully that makes sense for sewing that down. I'm going to do a quick demo on my leaf design, because can you grab me a pen? I forgot to grab a pen. Okay, so we're going to do an overhead shot, and let's say you had a border and you wanted to do a leaf outside of that border. So here's my really simple leaf design. So 1, 2, down the center, 3, 4, down the center, 5, 6, down the center. So you realize you're always going forward. Oftentimes you have a design, you do whatever the design, you come back to square one. And now how do I travel to the next one? But in this one, I love it because you're always going forward and you're not wasting time traveling to the next thing. And you can have fun with this. You know, the leaves can go in different directions and your leaf can look different than my leaf. But I use this quite often when I have, let's say, a little bit of sashing in the quilt and I need, you know, to nail down the sashing kind of thing. It's really good for that. So sashing or borders or wherever, if you've got a narrow design and it's got some nature in the quilt, leaves are a good thing. Okay, so that's what I used. So we're going to stay right here. The camera's going to stay right here because I want to talk about how to sew squares together. You could, okay, I've laid out my whole quilt. I've taken a picture of the final thing. You could pick up your first two pieces, walk to your machine, sew them down, bring it back, put it onto your design wall, pick up the next two pieces, sew them. That's a lot of up and downing. Well, maybe you didn't go to the gym today, so you want to do all that exercise, but I'm looking for efficiencies. I'm looking for the most efficient way. So instead, what I'm going to do is I've laid it all out on my design wall. I'm going to make a whole column here. So I'm going to pick this up, lay it on top, lay it on top, lay it on top. I'm going to take this to my sewing table, right? Let's pretend I've walked to my sewing table. I'm going to lay it down. Oftentimes I'll put these on my lap and I'll pick up the top two and it's like a page of a book. Flip it over like the page of a book and I'm going to sew this seam here. All right, put it here. Sew this seam. Now, this is the biggest mistake I see people make. Not so much now that I tell them about it in class, but this is a seam, but they're like, okay, let me get this all straight. Let me get all my corner. Oh no, where was I supposed to sew? So don't do that. We're going to lay it down again. And this one, it doesn't matter because they're just plain blocks. But sometimes your blocks are are oriented a certain way. So instead, we're going to pick them up. We're going to page of a book, close them up, and I'm going to just leave it right here. And I'm going to scrape it where I need it to go. Scrape, scrape, scrape. And then it's still the right orientation. And now I know I'm going to sew here. I'm not going to cut my thread. I'm going to pick up my next two pieces, page of a book, get them out oriented straight. Sew, not going to cut the thread. And I'm going to continue all the way down. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 20, however it is. You're going to sew them all down. They're all connected. Do not cut them apart. So this is what this is going to look like. Just going to get rid of this. So now it's going to look like this. It's exactly what it's going to look like. So I've got columns 1 and 2 attached. All I have to do is take that apart. Okay. Back in the day, I used to teach you did 1 and 2. Now you're going to sew 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and so forth. And I've realized that's difficult because it's difficult. So now what I do is I encourage you to just take the third column, sew that down, all the way down the third column. Once that's done and all attached, then I'll attach my fourth column and so forth all the way down. So when we're all done, put that away, it's going to look like this. Everything's attached, right? Do not cut it apart. This is called webbing the quilt. I don't have I think I might have a handout and I just didn't even think to look for it. So you can email me for the handout. Or you can Google webbing the quilt and Quiltville. Bonnie Hunter will probably come up because she has a nice explanation of what I just did. But that's it. It's webbing the quilt. And now we can go back at our leisure. And so, of course, nesting each seam as we go along. One tip on that, I always keep the seam that I just sewed on the top. So that means if this seam went up, and this seam goes down because I'm nesting, then that means this is going to go down and this will go up. So this is down and this is up. So if you keep your previous seam on the top side, then you kind of look sideways. Oh yeah, this one's got to go down. This one's got to, oh, I messed up here. So this one's got to go up, whatever. So make sure, because you don't want twisted seams. You don't want it going down here and up there. You want it to keep it the same. So if you're nesting the seams, you have to pay attention to what was already sewn so you don't twist your seams. Hopefully that made sense. Thank you. I think it is a brilliant technique. I did not invent it. I'm not taking credit for it, but I use it all the time. So again, I'm going to lay out all these big 7-inch blocks on my design wall. I've set it up the way I wanted. I've taken some pictures. I've made some changes, and then sew them together just like that. So do I free motion with a ruler on the squares? Yes, Donna, that's exactly what I do. I glue sticked the little square down, and then I use a straight edge quilting ruler, not a cutting ruler. And I go around all 4 sides, cut my thread, and go to the next one. Yes, do you not iron the rows before nesting? Good question. I do not iron. My blocks are all ironed, but once I start webbing the quilt, I don't iron until it's all completely sewn, because I'm not quite sure which way I want the seam to go until I've done it. And so if I don't press the seams one way, then I'm not forced to sew them that way. So good question. I press the individual blocks, then I web the whole quilt, then I finish sewing the whole top, and then I go back and press the finished quilt top. So yeah, thank you for asking that. Any other good questions? Thank you so far. Great questions. Is that everything I wanted to say about that? Why did I use a 7.5-inch square? I happen to have that ruler. If you have a 10-inch ruler you want to use, please do. Make it as easy on yourself as possible. Whatever size ruler you got, use that one. Okay, I think we're good. I just want to show you the back, which is the backs of all those green shirts. I chopped up a bunch of backs and I sewed them together, and that made the back of that quilt. I think I'm done talking about this one, so I'm going to pull it down. We're ready to talk about the next quilt, unless you have questions about plaid boxers. All right. This quilt, some of you may recognize it, maybe not. There's a kind of an old pattern out there, let's scoot over here, called Yellow Brick Road. You may recognize it from Atkinson's Design. This is another oldie but goodie. I brought one a few months ago that was an oldie but goodie, and this is another one. As I travel around the country over the summer, and I go into these quilt shops, and there's these beautiful quilts, I'm like, wait a minute, I think that's Yellow Brick Road. And sure enough, it was made out of brand new fabrics. We may be able to get a chance to make some kits for this quilt. Also, this will be my new beginner quilt class coming first quarter of next year. So I was San Julian. It's probably the last time I'll be teaching San Julian. When am I teaching it? In November. And then next quarter, I'm going to teach Yellow Brick Road. Very simple pattern. You're cutting fat quarters. It's very fat quarter friendly. So I took 6 different fat quarters to make this quilt, plus the border and the back. So again, that'll probably be a beginner class. One of the reasons I love this design, this pattern, is that there's very few, this is a block. Let's say this is a block, and sitting right next to another block, and I did not have to match any internal seams in the blocks. So every once in a while I did, because I didn't have a lot of blocks to choose from. I'm going to show you another quilt in a minute. There's very few times where I had to match seams with the next block, because this is a solid piece and there's 2 seams there. So that makes it a little easier to put together when you don't have a lot of internal block seams that you have to match the next block. So Yellow Brick Road, and I want to show you, before I finish talking about that, I was looking at it, I was like, I love this quilt, but I'm not sure if it really shows off all the Yellow Brick Roadness that it could. So I found a stash of old cherry wood fabric in my stash. Exact same pattern, just different fabrics, of course. And this is also exactly a Yellow Brick Road quilt. And it doesn't look anything like it, of course, with color, but also every block, you can set it up 4 different ways. So you can keep twisting your block until you like it. And that's all I did here. This quilt has 3 different blocks. And so it's just the way you lay them out. It's just the way you distribute the colors. My daughter called this mid-century modern colors. But if you're familiar with cherry wood, they dye fabric that makes it look like it's sueded. It just has this beautiful suede feel to it, but it's just cotton fabric that they've dyed. So you can get it in great colorways. So that's just an some out of my stash. It's a long time ago. We don't carry anything like that right now. Anyway, back to this quilt. I quilted it with a 5-point star design that I teach in my machine quilting class, and I can do a quick little demo on that, plus some little loop-de-loops, because there's like, it's a lot of star type stuff. I thought stars, I do a lot of times I do my thinking about how I'm going to quilt something in my exercise class. So I'm sitting there probably not paying very much attention, thinking, how am I going to quilt this on Thursday morning? And I figured it out, and I got home, came home and did it. Didn't take me very long. Here's anchors on the back. And I wanted to talk for a second about the backing. I'm looking for a diagonal line. It must be on the other side. Let's see. So if you're familiar with this technique, there's my diagonal line. There's a technique that I call John Flynn diagonal backing. And it goes all the way up. So it's like this. The whole idea here is that sometimes you make a quilt, it's just a little bit bigger than 40 inches wide. And of course, most fabric is 42 inches wide. You're like, I really don't want to buy a whole nother, two yards of fabric, whatever, just to get this much more backing fabric, right? So the technique is that instead of buying whole nother length, you buy a little more yardage and you cut it in such a way that it gives you enough fabric for both ways. So I've got a little demo here to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to use this. Okay, so here's the fabric. Let's say the fabric is wider, and actually the quilt is wider than this. So I take this piece of fabric, I cut it, and I'll talk about how I do that in a minute. I cut it on the diagonal, and watch what happens. We bring this down. This fabric is now wide enough for the quilt, and hopefully long enough too, and we'll talk about that. There's a formula. You plug in some numbers, and you get this formula, and it allows you to use one length of fabric. So for this quilt, I needed like 90 inches. So that's certainly not twice the length. So 90 inches for my backing was a lot less than if I bought two quilt lengths. So what we do here is there's a formula on my website. Again, my website's at the bottom of every page. This is not my idea. There used to be a calculator out there a long time ago, and I was here in the store getting backing fabric, and I went to look it up, the calculator, and they had taken it off the web. So I went home and I told my husband, could you please put this calculator on my website so at least it's still out there? So it is. So you tell the calculator how tall your quilt is, how wide your quilt is. This is at the top, the width and length of your quilt top. You tell it how much overhang you want on the four sides. I like to have at least 3 inches on all four sides to baste it down. And then finally, you tell it how wide your backing fabric is. So 4 numbers, you type in those 4 numbers, hit go, and it tells you how long of a piece of yardage you need to cut like this, that you will have enough to do what you need to do. So my number over here was like 91 inches. So that's what I bought. So now what do we do? So we've got 91 inches of fabric. How the heck do I cut this fabric like this and then sew it back together? So here's the practical, right? It's practical. You need a second person. So my husband will stand on one side of the fabric, and I will stand over here, and he'll pinch this and I'll pinch that. And then we'll lay this on the ground. I do this on the floor of in my family room. Lay this on the floor, and it looks something like that. And then I will put a cutting board underneath it. I have a hardwood floor, so slide the cutting board down. I take my ruler and my rotary cutter, and I cut off just the merest, slimmest little fold. I'm just cutting off the fold. That's way easier than drawing a line and trying to cut it. So I just cut off the fold. Right? Open it up. So now it looks like this. And now I sit on the floor with my 2 yardsticks, and I keep measuring back and forth until I get the numbers I need. And I forgot to say, if you do this with the wrong side up, then you could just pinch once you get it where you want it. Let's see here. I pinch the fabric and I put a couple pins in, carry it to my sewing machine, and I sew it down. So the only thing you're wasting are these two triangles. That's the only waste, because you bought exactly the amount of fabric you needed and no more. So I hope that makes sense. And if, like I said, the calculator on my website doesn't have a lot of explanation. I guess I should write up a little thing. I can send you a handout for how to do all of that if you send me an email, which is at the bottom of every handout. Yeah, so hopefully that made sense. That was called the John Flynn Diagonal John Flynn Diagonal Backing Calculator. And that is great. It's great for up to 60-inch wide quilt. If your quilt is wider than 60 inches, go ahead and buy your 2 lengths because you're going to need it. If it's less than 60 inches, this is a great technique. All right. I'm going to pull out my blue sheet because that's my cheat sheet. All right, next quilt. Oh, I've got flange binding on this as well. So you can come in and visit this quilt because we'll be hanging it because it'll be a class. So that's this quilt here. And you can't really see the diagonal. I mean, you do have to really get up close and personal to see that diagonal line back there. It's hidden pretty well. So I talk about that technique every once in a while, but I thought I don't have the handout this time, but I've talked about it in TT&T's past. All right, big old thread right in the center there. Can we move the camera up just a little bit, the center one, or no? Okay, yeah, so this is your next handout. Yeah, we've lost the top of it. There it is. Keep going, almost there. All right, thank you. Yeah, and also I'm taller, so it's nice to my head not to get chopped off as well. So the handout is here. It's the back, it's the second page of your handout. It's called Woven 4 Patches. And if you look very closely, it's made out of a bunch of 4 patches plus some background fabric. So start collecting your different shades. You know, instead of just using one yellow, I used maybe 8 or 10 yellows, and I think that's a way more interesting quilt than just a single yellow and a single green and a single blue and a single pink. So of course you don't have to use my colors. Use the colors that you want to use. But I wanted to talk a little bit about 4 patches. I know some new people out there, and you haven't seen my nifty 4 patch technique, and I would love to show that to you. So everybody's got to have a way to process scraps. So this is my technique. So when my bucket of scraps gets too big, I pull it out. I cut either 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch jelly roll strips. If it's some long pieces, so I have a scrap jelly roll or 2.5-inch strip box. I have a 1.5-inch strip box. And then I cut a lot of 5-inch squares. Mostly I use them for my 4 patches. We can go ahead and do the overhead. And I have so many 4 patch and 16 patch quilt patterns that I have written. The one behind me is just one of many. So let's get to it. Let me show you how I make 4 patches. So this is a 4 patch, by the way, in case you're not familiar with a 4 patch. That's a pretty basic quilting block. If I want to make a 4 patch, I need 4 pieces of fabric. These happen to be 5-inch squares. Why 5? Because that's just my number that I decided. You could do 6, you could do 4, you could do whatever you want. The nice thing about 5s is if you have a few pieces left from a charm pack that you made, throw them in the pile and eventually they'll sort out for whatever colors you need. I keep my 5-inch squares separated by color. Also, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so we've got 4 colors. All right, we're going to put light over dark. And hang on a second, make sure I did that right. I've done this a million times. Yeah, that's it. Light over dark, light over dark. This makes a really good leader ender project. So you're sewing a chain of something and you need a little scrap of fabric. Instead of a scrap of fabric, throw in, always have a pile of this kind of thing next to me for the next quilt or just some scraps. So the next time you have a chain, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. The next time you have a chain, you're going to sew another 1/4 inch seam, 1/4 inch seam, 1/4 inch seam. So now they're going to look something like, my fingers aren't working, this and this. Okay, you might be able to see the stitches and the stitches. All right. So we're going to take this and we're going to cut it in half with the lines parallel to what you already sewed. So we're going to cut down the middle, cut down the middle. Guess what happens? Guess what you get when you cut down the middle? You get 2 of these and 2 of these. Hopefully that makes sense. 2 of those. There it is. Okay. So when you cut it down the middle and open up each side, you get 2 of these. So guess what we're going to do next? We're going to put a dark over light and a dark over light. So we're going to flip that over. And you don't have to do dark over light. You can just use a bunch of scraps, whatever you want to do. But I now am going to turn this 90 degrees and we're going to sew this seam and this seam. When you cut that down the middle, you end up with 2 4 patches. So I call this MJ's nifty 4 patch technique. If you've never seen that and you don't have the handout, send me an email. I'll send you the handout. But that's basically what you're doing, is creating a whole bunch of 4 patches. I am 4 patch nuts. I've made a million of these things and I continue to. So when I have a pile at my sewing machine and it looks like this, I know just what to do. I know I need to sew the other 2 sides to get my 4 patch. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Make yourselves a bunch of 4 patches and go to town, because they are lots of fun and you can do a lot of different things with a 4 patch. I think I'm up to 8 or 9 different patterns that I've written with 16 patches, which is basically, we can do another overhead, Kelsey. 16 patch is basically 4 patches sewn together, right? That's a 16 patch. And I have a lot of patterns that do 16 patches. And you've seen, if you've been with me for a while, you've seen some of them, I'm sure. So that is how we made the 4 patches on this quilt. Your quilt doesn't have to be as small as this. It could be as big as you want, but I did use a yard, almost a yard of fabric for the background. So if yours going to be bigger, of course, you're going to need more background. But it's just very simple. This is one of those quilts you're definitely going to have to lay out to make sure you've got that woven thing going on. If you wanted to do some transparency, you could have where the intersection are, you could, just try to do some, you could probably do 2 blues and 2 pinks or something like that. I didn't think to do that, but you certainly could. You could do a lot of different things with this. It's just a jumping off point. So yeah, cute backing. That was out of a Stack and Whack quilt that I made a while ago. So let me know if you have questions about this quilt. I quilted it with little flowers, but I tried to hit as many intersections as I could. The more intersections you have in a quilt, the closer you're going to need to quilt, the smaller your design. So you make sure you hit all those intersections. I guess we could bring the camera down a little bit. Now I feel like there you go. There you go. I've got 3 more things to tell you about. So turn your handout. What do we got next? Zipper coin pouch. I'm going to say all this again in case you just joined me. Kelsey is going to put up the link for the handout. So be sure to either follow along on another device or print it out so you can see what we're doing here. What am I doing? Oh, I've got the wrong thing. Try again. Too many bags. Okay. So what is a zippered coin pouch? Wait till you see. Everybody was really, after this morning's show, everybody was out there buying vinyl and fabric and interfacing to make these because they're so much fun. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. What the heck is it? This is let's do an overhead, Kelsey. This is a pouch. You can do all kinds of hardware. I bought a swivel hook that matches my zipper. And I want to say this before I forget. We have a ton of Zipper by the Yard, which I'll talk about more, but it looks metallic. Oh, this is a beautiful rose gold, but we've got all kinds of different, what look like metallic, but it is not. It is made with nylon. If you read the packaging, it says nylon. So, because I cautioned several times this morning, be sure you get something with a nylon or plastic teeth because you don't want to sew over metal. And I forgot to say that a lot of what we have looks like metal, but it is actually nylon. So so here it is. Why am I having there it is. Oh, I put something in here. No, I didn't. That was extra. Oh, this is one of my demo pieces. Let me show you another one. Open it up, little coin purse. You can make them all different sizes. Have a little handle here. We can use some different hardware. This is a rat tail, so that's pretty simple. We can also use, I believe this is called braid or soutache. A while ago I did this, and I'll do a demo again, but you can braid your thin trim with your machine on the bobbin. Long story. I could talk about that later if you're interested. But here's some different ones, and I made these 3 sizes, which is the picture on your handout. This starts with a 9.5-inch square. That's how big this is. So it's about 4.5 inches. This is an 8.5-inch square, so a little smaller. And this starts out with a 7.5-inch square. So you can see the different sizes. So I would encourage you just to cut a square, make it, see how you like the size. I use the same zipper tape, but this one has a split ring on it. So I had a little tab of fabric with a split ring. We'll talk about the tab in a minute. This just has a simple fabric tab. And then this one has a swivel hook. So a little, I can, open this up and put it on my belt loop or on a tote bag or something like that. So everything else is the same, the size and then the hardware. So I just wanted to show you all the different types of hardware that are possible. I picked up this beautiful rose gold hardware that matches my zipper perfectly. Don't look, but that doesn't match, but that's all I had at the moment. This is actually made from a 16 patch block. So I just finished talking about 16 patch. So if you have an orphan block, it's really cute, but what else do I do with it? You can make one of these bags, show you in a minute, and then just some other cute fabric. I came in the other day and somebody's cutting fat quarters with this fabric, and I have another demo with another piece of the fabric, and I just love this line so much. It's like, okay, what can I make with this fabric? And so I went home and I made one of these, but and I'll show you more later. Okay, how do we make these things? You're not going to believe how simple they are. We're going to stay with the overhead. What we need to start with is a square. I don't even know what size square this is. This is a 9-inch square. 9.5-inch square. All right, so 9.5. When I'm just doing fabric, I like to fuse, and it's in the handout what type of fusible, but basically any medium to lightweight fusible interfacing. You can see that I was using up some little scraps from the piece of interfacing I had, and that's okay. It's going to be fine. It's mostly interface. That's the most important point. We're going to fold this in half and press the diagonal nice and sharp, okay? And if you came to, I want to say Christmas in August, we did something similar called a Hemingway bag. Something, what's that? Oh, it was a class, okay. So this is going to be a square, and that other thing was a rectangle, but this is going to be a square. All right, so now it's time to apply your zipper. So I'm a huge fan of zipper by the yard. This was probably 5 yards, and I cut, what did I need? I'm not going to cut it exactly. I need a little extra. I probably went overboard on this, but I have an inch extra here and maybe 3 inches here. I could have gone a little less, but I encourage you to cut it a little big the first time, and then you'll decide, oh, maybe I need an 1.5 inches less or something. But the nice thing is you're only going to use half the zipper. This morning I started to cut this in half, or tear it in half. It's that simple. You just take it apart. Now I've got zippers for 2 bags. I'll put one aside. I'm going to take this zipper, and sometimes when you're applying zippers, you have to sew 2 or 3 times. You have to sew it under, and then you flip it over, and then you top stitch down. I don't have to do any of that. One simple top stitch line, and you notice it's going to be a little bigger on one side than on the other on purpose. So one sew down. I have discovered I don't use my zipper foot very often, because what I do instead is I move my needle over. So the edge of my foot is right up against the zipper tape. But if I move my needle way over to the right, let's say this is on the right, move my needle over to the right, then I can sew that down, no problem. And by the way, some of you may not realize that you can move your needle over. Unless you've got a 30-year-old machine or more, most times if you're in straight stitch mode and you change your stitch width with a dial or a button, it moves your needle to the left or the right. So give that a try. And every time I say that in class, there's at least one person like, oh, I didn't know my machine did that. So give it a try. Just move your needle over instead of switching over to your zipper foot. So I sewed this down. So here we are. I'll take my zipper foot off. We sewed it down and we fold it in half so it's pretty on both sides. Now here is the magic. So watch carefully. I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to bring this point over to the center and this point over to the center. It's that simple, right? All I have to do is sew it together now. So I have Wonder clips are your best friend at this project. Yes, you could use pins, but Wonder clips are so much easier. I fought the Wonder clip thing for a long time, and when I finally got one, it's like, what was I waiting for? I love my Wonder clips. So there we go. And especially when you're going through all these layers, sometimes pins get things out of alignment. Plus you're going to poke yourself 5 times. So hit it with some Wonder clips. Okay. Now you're going to watch me live put this zipper on, but I promise you it's easier. Easy, easy, easy. So this is why we wanted it longer. So we attached it to the first one, and this is going to be easier than it was this morning. This morning I was trying to do it in the air. It took me a couple tries. And then hold the 2 pieces. Whoop, I didn't do it the first time. I'll get it, I promise. It's a little raggedy because I've done it a few times. All right, come on. There it is. Okay, installed it. You need the clips here because this needs to be, I did it a little bit off. I would do it again, but you need the clips there. Now, we're done with that. We're going to leave the zipper head halfway. We're going to flip this right side in, reorganize my edges, clip and clip. And now I need to install my hardware or my tab, whatever I decide. Now's the time I got to put that in there. I had a purple one, but it's somewhere, so I'm going to use this. I'm going to talk in a minute how to make this, but that gets installed in here on the corner. So now we're going through a lot of layers. So you're going to, not necessarily a walking foot, but definitely a strong needle. I would use a size 90 or a 100 to go through all of that. The reason we wanted a nylon zipper teeth zipper is because you're going to be sewing, going through all those layers and all that nylon, and you're sewing here. So you definitely do not want metal. You do not want to be going through metal. And then once that's done, here it is. I'm at this point, poke out my corners again. So easy. I love this bag so much. And I could even zip it from the inside a little bit. Now I'm going to take my scissors and probably want to cut that at a bit of an angle and that at a bit of an angle to cut off all that extra. You're done. You could serge the edges if you want. You could cover them with hem tape. You could do all kinds of things. Or you could even do a French seam if you wanted to, but I don't really find any of that necessary. I think it's beautiful on the inside, even without doing any of that. You can use a point turner or you can use your thumb. I think the point turners are on my favorites page. If you don't have one, you really should. I like to keep a little tag on. I mean, just like this, it's going to fall between the furniture and I'll never find it. But if I put some kind of ribbon on it, then I'm more likely to find it when I drop it. What else did I want to say about this? I think that might be it. How cute is that? Oh, I wanted to talk about the tab a little bit. So let's talk about how to make this tab. If you've never made a handle for a bag or anything, maybe you've not seen all this. So I'm going to take a piece. I think this is about 2 inches by 3 inches. I'm going to fold it in half, press it. I'm going to fold in this piece halfway and this piece halfway, fold it again in half, press it. And now I've got my a tab. I usually will make a nice long one. If I'm making a bunch of one color, I'll just make one long one because it's easier and then cut it into the sizes that I want. So again, even if you're going to use hardware, you still have to have a little bit of a tab. You do not want to be sewing through hardware. You want to sew through fabric and then attach your hardware, whatever it is, to that tab. Hopefully that makes sense. These are so much fun. I think these are Christmas presents of the year. Again, this was a 16 patch that I folded in half. I'm not even sure maybe I put some interfacing in there. Interfacing is good just to make it a little more stable. But how cute is that? Let me know if you have questions. It is a cute little pouch. Oh, and I do need to give credit. You know, I'm scrolling through YouTube. I was like, oh, this looks interesting. Pull it up. Wow, she did a great job on the video. She probably has more points than I did. I tried to grab all the best points as I was making them, but the URL for her video is right under my picture. It's a tiny URL, so type that in and you'll get to Sew Becca, who's got the free video. So check it out. She does a great job explaining everything, but I wanted to write it all down. You know, once you've done a couple, my instructions here will, you know, get you where you need to go. So I would highly recommend having some zippers by the yard. I have maybe 3 or 4 colors, and I'm constantly going back and snipping off a little more, grabbing a head, because the package comes with a lot of heads. And in fact, this particular project, it uses a lot more heads than zippers, so you probably want to grab yourself an extra pack. Most of our zippers come with extra little packages of heads if you want to buy more heads. And for this, if you're going to make a bunch of that, I would definitely get more zipper heads. So yeah, let me know if you have questions. Does the coin powder work okay with vinyl? Oh, thank you for saying that. That was the other thing I wanted to say. Yes, it works great with vinyl. I forgot to bring my vinyl. I love making these with clear vinyl. We also have some really cute printed vinyl with all these cute little patterns on them. You can still see through it, but it's printed with colors. But I've been making these with clear vinyl. You will need your Teflon foot to go through the tube, and I have yet to get a Teflon foot for my mains, you know me. I've got it for my Juki, but I haven't pulled out my Juki, so I haven't been making them with vinyl lately. But when I do, I love them because you can see what's inside, of course. So vinyl is fairly inexpensive too. So I'll buy a yard or two and then just use it for various projects. So all the different vinyls are on sale. I don't think they're in my favorites page, but if you type in clear vinyl probably on the search, we'll give it a try. Yeah. So yes, it works great with vinyl, and you don't need to cut a square and fold it in half with the vinyl. You can just use a single triangle. So you're going to cut a square of vinyl, you're going to cut it in half and just use half. So you will get 2 coin purses out of 1 square of vinyl. So we're going to let you know how you can find it on the website, unless you like to come in, because we love to see your pretty faces. I've got 2 more things to talk about before we are done. And I want to talk about quilting a quilt in sections. You're like, Mary-Jeanine, I would love to be able to say I made this whole quilt myself, but the quilts are just too big and I can't quilt them myself. So here's a suggestion. If you've taken my machine quilting class, you've heard me talk about this. Instead of making an entire king size, queen size, whatever quilt, and then trying to base the whole thing and get the whole thing under your machine, quilt it in sections. It could be 2 sections. It could be 3, 4, 10, whatever. Yes, it's similar to Quilt As You Go, similar. So here's a quilt that I talk about in the class. It looks like one solid quilt, one big quilt, but in actually, yep, leave the camera there. But in actually, you can see from the back, I put 2 different backings on it just so you could see that it's 2 separate pieces that I have sewn together. So one more time, it looks like one perfect pieced quilt, but it's been sewn into 2 sections. I have another quilt that was sewn into 3 sections I'll talk about in a minute. So let's do an overhead. I'll show you how we do this. So I quilted one section, I quilted the other section, and then I trimmed them down to that 1/4 inch for the piecing. And now this is actually, I did it in a 3rd color just so you could see, but of course you would make them all the same color. This is actually binding. It's 2.5 inch wide piece of fabric, folded in half so the pretty side is out. And I'm going to sew through all of these layers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We will definitely want to use a walking foot to sew through all 8 layers and probably a size 90 or 100 needle to get through all those layers safely without breaking the needle. So you're going to sew that all the way down your quilt. And then I've got a little piece here where I've folded this down. And yes, you're going to have to hand sew this. If you were to machine sew it, your line would show on the front. You may not want that. If you don't care, then by all means, sew it down. If it's a little lumpy here, you can get in here with your snips and get rid of some of that excess batting so it's not quite so lumpy on the back. But that's how you join the seams. We're going to talk about borders in a minute, but I wanted to show, let's do an all over front shot. This is a quilt. It's kind of faded because I made it when the kids were little. It's an I Spy quilt. And we've been, using it for years. They'd come around the corner and the kids would have it on the floor and they'd be playing the I Spy game with it. Also, they were both, I guess kind of both learning how to read. So let's do a close up here. You can see I hand stitched lots of words on there, and then they could read the word and try to find that item. So it's kind of a multi-use quilt. So let's do an overhead because I want to show you if you use the same color, blue, and the blue down here, it's really hard to tell that I quilted them all in separate 3 different pieces. So there's a seam, and then there's another seam, and I was running out of blue backing, so I threw in this, and then love my quilts that have a foot pocket. We've talked about it before, and we'll talk about it again. There's a lot going on to this quilt. One day, my kids are going to say, Mom, who's going to get that I Spy quilt? Because I want it. I figure I'm going to say the first one that has kids, that's who gets the I Spy quilt. So get started. My son is getting married next Saturday, and then my daughter is getting married in 7 months. So it's going to be a busy wedding season. So who knows? Maybe we'll get grandkids. Let's talk about borders. Okay, so we made the quilt, but how the heck are we going to get borders on? So this quilt has just has one border on it right now. So I'm going to show you how we make this border. And of course, you'd put it on top and bottom, then left and right. Let's do an overhead. So I've got a front piece of fabric. I've got the batting, and I've got the back piece of fabric. So again, you're going to sew them on to the edge of your quilt after you've trimmed off the edge of your quilt. There's the front. I'm going to turn it around so you can see the stitching from the back. So there's the backing fabric and the batting. So we're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. So again, with the walking foot, start at the top, get yourself a nice perfect 1/4 inch seam all the way down. When you're finished, you open it up, and there's your border for the first one. Yes, you're going to have to quilt that, but again, you can do it top and bottom, left and right. Quick story. We can do a regular shot here. Quick story. I had a sister-in-law who had a featherweight that was barely used, and I said, what do you want for it? And she said, I want one of your quilts. So we went through my phone, we looked at all my quilts. She said, I like this one. It wasn't big enough, so I literally rotary cut off the binding, attached more borders to it with this method, put new binding on it. So I created, it was actually a French braid because it was a pretty wide, she needed it much bigger. So 15-inch wide borders. I made a French braid design and then sewed it to the front, just the way I just showed you, put new binding on it, and she was happy. I was happy. I had a new featherweight. So hopefully that helps. If you're want to make a really big quilt, you want to say you made the whole thing, but you're worried about how do I quilt this big thing, quilt it in sections. Of course, you have to think about that when you're sewing your quilt together. You can't piece the whole thing and like, oh yeah, I wanted to do it in sections and then have to take apart a seam. So think about it before you start sewing all your blocks together. Let's see. That's how I quilt mine, but I've never seen it done with the batting. Yeah, what size stitch? Thank you. What size stitch? Probably a 3.0. If you're talking about sewing all those layers together, probably a 3.0 would be fine. I find that with my walking foot, my stitch tends to get small when I use a walking foot with most machines. So I end up increasing my stitch length just so I have regular size stitches with my walking foot. So thank you for asking that. And I don't read Spanish, so I don't know what you know what that says? No, Linda. I know Linda's pretty. So if you could tell us in Spanish, that would be lovely, or in English, that would be lovely. I took 3 years of Spanish from 3 different teachers because we moved around a lot. One of the teachers was Polish and one of the teachers was German. And so I learned some really interesting Spanish. And I have to get a drink because I am getting parched. And then we've got one more project before I let you go. So it's in your handout. Multo Linda. Okay. Very pretty. I think that's what, but I don't know what the other one is. All right. We are going to talk about button boxes. What the heck is that? Look at these cute little things made out of 2 pieces of fabric and a button on the edges. So I've got lots more to show you. There's a tiny little one, and I've got some of the sizes I wrote down so I can help you with that. I made this one yesterday with that same line of fabric as this. Is a little abstract hexagons. I just love them. We could do a close up, not an overhead, but a close up here. Yeah. So beautiful fabric. I wish I could remember the name of the line, Kelsey. No, we'd have to, we'll look it up. But yeah, it's right next to the cutting table. So around the corner from the cutting table. So if you're in the store, please take a look. It's right on top. I just love these fabrics so much. And they're all different colors. I just picked these 2, but yeah, these 3 different fabrics. But the button box, cute little buttons. And then here, so this I use soft and stable. So it's very stiff and very, I mean, you can crunch it up and then it's soft and stable. So it's perfect. So throw it in your suitcase, bring it as a Christmas gift, and it's perfect. And it really will do that for a long period of time. This is just made with, it's just got batting in it. So it's much softer, but you kind of have to get it back to where I wanted it. This was, last time I taught this was the latest fabric. So I love that. Don't think we have it anymore. Just an old tie-dye, some old scrappy fabric. And then this one is made out of flannel, actually. So that's kind of different. So this one, I started with a 13-inch square. It's not only important to know what size the square was, but how big the box corners were. We'll talk about in a minute. So I'm going to leave these all here so you can enjoy them. And then, oh, I've got this one. This one actually sits by my front door with a little, fake IKEA plant. But I think this makes a really cute gift for maybe somebody in the hospital or somebody at home healing. You can bring a nice little, whether it's real flowers or fake flowers, and then put it in a cute little thing, because that's not so cute, but this is very cute. So just an idea. All right. So how do we do this? As with a lot of things, 2 layers of squares of fabric, and then I'm using batting, but again, you can use soft and stable as well. Soft and stable, if you're not familiar with it, is an amazing product. It's foam. Sometimes it could be fusible if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be. It's foam, but so the foam makes it stable, but on either side of it is a kind of a fabric, is a lightweight fabric. So it can be its own fabric. You don't have to put fabric on both sides of it. If you wanted to do quilt as you go kind of thing, you could just have the soft and stable on the back, and your feed dogs won't eat into it and stuff. So there's just a million different things you can do with it. I showed you my tote bag that I made with soft and stable that stands up on its own. It doesn't slouch around like it would if it was batting. And then, these are scraps left over, because soft and stable is not cheap. So I use every single bit. I keep a binder clip with all my little bits, and when I have a little project, find a little bit that I can use to make something fun with. But it's a game changer. I love soft and stable so much. And we have it fusible, we have it regular, one side fusible, both sides fusible. So it depends on your project. A lot of the Buy Annie bags call for soft and stable, and she actually, I believe, developed it, and then other companies kind of picked up on it. So back to this batting. 2 pieces of fabric, right sides together. We're going to sew all the way around. We're going to leave a turning hole. 1 tip on that. This is my turning hole. 1 tip on that. I don't know about you, but I get started sewing, and I'm sewing, and then all of a sudden I'm out in somewhere, and then all of a sudden I've accidentally closed up my little turning hole. So now I put 2 pins at the end So I'm sewing and my mind is somewhere else, and I come around like, oh, 2 pins, I better stop. So that's a little tip if that happens to you, because I'm pretty sure it's happened to everybody. We are going to turn this right side out. You're going to end up with something that looks like this. So I top stitched it. You could do a little quilting on it. I didn't quilt this yesterday, but I think because it was fusible, I just didn't feel like it needed it. It's a little bubbly, but I'm okay with that. But you can certainly quilt. If it's batting, you probably do want to quilt it just to keep it all stable. The quilting really stabilizes it. Okay, so we're going to take this and fold it in half with the inside of your box on the outside. So in this case, I would have put yellow on the outside. I'm actually making this little guy. So there's the inside. So there's my inside. And I'm going to sew where my fingers are. I'm going to sew 2 triangles like my fingers are. It's not what you think. So you're going to sew there. If the bigger the triangle, the taller your bag. This is a very tall bag. This is a very short bag. But so this is going to be tall and smaller. Just so it just depends, your whatever, you got to play with it. You make your first one and decide how, you want it bigger or taller or shorter or whatever. So I sewed 2 triangles. This is all in the handout. And then, so here I am. Those triangles are sewn. I'm going to open it up and we're going to sew the other 2 corners like that. So now it looks very funky like this. Got all 4 corners sewn. And now it's time to flip it right side out. You can use your fingertips to punch those corners out. This is soft and stable, by the way. Or you can use your point turner. And then once you turn down the point and sew your buttons on, you're done. Well, almost. I like to sew down these little triangles that are inside. You don't want to cut them off. You want to sew them down. Sometimes you get lucky and they are right where the button is. So I can be sewing the button on and sewing these little corners down. And sometimes they're pretty far away from the center. And I have to have 3 different tack marks, 1, 2, and 3. So you just get to decide. This is a 14.5-inch unfinished square, by the way, but the triangles were very short. And so it ended up a pretty big box. So candy, Halloween candy, gift card, whatever you would use a bowl for. I love this idea of a little plant, gifting a plant. So use up some of those buttons in your button stash. Yeah, I think unless there's questions, I think we are done. That's how I quilt mine. Yes, I think we got it all. Thank you, Kelsey, for doing tech for us today. And we had a shortage of people, but Kelsey came in and saved the day for us. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining me. Join the shop, buy a passport for your shop hop, and we will see you November, but not December. So December is too close to Christmas, but November, it's the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So hopefully I'll see you then. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Did you make your jacket?
Did I make my jacket? No, this is probably Chico's. It's just a little poncho thing. Love Chico's. Thank you, Carol. Take care. Bye-bye.